Good morning and welcome to fellowship class from First United Methodist Church in Henrietta, Texas. I certainly pray that you and your family are remaining well, and I look forward to seeing all of you once again sitting in these pews in the chapel. Now, when that's going to happen, we still don't know, but we do know this. We serve a loving God, and He knows and understands our every need. So let's just remain strong, continue to have faith, and one of these days, these pews will be filled in here and we'll be back to some degree of normalcy. Our lesson focus today is about being clean and unclean in the sight of others. I've got a bottle of spray Lysol Clean, a scrub brush, and as I rummaged through my cleaning closet this morning, I couldn't help but think about my mother, who was actually the queen of clean. We always called her. When she sent three daughters off to college, she said all she had taught us was Jesus and germs, and that was plenty to send us off into the wide world. And her wisdom was pretty true. Really, Jesus and germs and their knowledge will get you through any crisis. I've got some Lysol up there, but I thought of cleaners from the past. My mother always had a can of that gritty Babo stuff. Some of you might remember that. It would eat your skin up, really, and it was bound to have killed any sort of germ that might have invaded our home. Our scripture today will lead us to the surprising conclusion that faith actually can be found in people who are not part of our community. It could be our faith community, it could be our community as a whole. But the scripture is talking about clean and unclean. And there's a lot of customs that will be referred to in our scripture reading today. The scripture revolves around a woman who was an outsider to Jesus and his disciples. In fact, she was an outsider to all Jews in general. I must say this about the scripture today also. This may be the most difficult of the texts that we will have read in this series, because Jesus himself seems at first to treat her as an outcast. And in the series that we've had, we've talked about Zacchaeus, we've talked about the Samaritan woman at the well. Last week we had the Good Samaritan. All these individuals being considered in their day and age an outcast of sorts. And the lady that we'll be reading about today is also an outcast among others. Our scripture today is found in the 15th chapter of the book of Matthew, verses 21 through 28. Matthew 15, 21 through 28. I'll read the entire scripture and then we'll go back and discuss some of the finer points. Jesus left that place and went away to a district of Tyre and Sidon. And just then, a Canaanite woman from that region came out and started shouting, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is tormented by a demon." But he did not answer her at all. And his disciples came and urged him, saying, Send her away, for she keeps shouting after us." He answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But she came and knelt before him, saying, "Lord, help me." He answered, "It is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." She said, "Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." Then Jesus answered her, "Woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you wish." And her daughter was healed instantly. There's a lot to think about in this scripture. You need to realize, though, that in the previous scripture found in Matthew 15, this is what had happened. Jesus had been in a debate with the Pharisees, actually, about the purity practices of his disciples. And of all things, it was about the washing of their hands. And some of the Pharisees had noticed, well, your guys are not washing their hands properly. They're not going by prescribed practices. They are unclean. And Jesus had a lot to say about that observation. In fact, if you back up to verses 18 through 20, this is what Jesus says about being unclean. "But what comes out of the mouth proceeds from the heart, and this is what defiles. For out of the heart comes evil intentions, murder, adultery, fornication, theft, false witness, slander. These are what defile a person. But to eat with unwashed hands does not defile." So he was talking about having a clean heart and proceeding to speak with a clean heart. And that was more important in Jesus' eyes. Why do you think Jesus failed to answer the woman at first? When I read this earlier in the week, it really bothered me. I thought, Jesus, that's not being very nice. Come on, Jesus, now let's step this up a little bit. She's asking for help. We don't really know why he reacts in the manner that he does. There are some possibilities here, and I think they make sense. I think he really wanted to see what the disciples would do with this situation. Was he testing the woman, perhaps, in her sincerity and what she was truly about? Who was this woman? We don't know a great deal about her, but we do know this. She's a Canaanite. She's not Jewish. So that classified her as an outsider immediately. And she just intrudes in their conversation and is rather pushy, you might say. But if you examine her words, she shouts to Jesus and the disciples. In the Greek translation, however, I think it's important to understand this. She doesn't just mean that she's shouting at them. The Greek meaning includes the notion of crying out in a desperate appeal. She's at her wit's end. She's seeking help from whom she thinks might be able to help her. On another note, I think this woman has a mother's heart. I truly do. I think she has a mother's heart. and she is desperately seeking help for this child that she loves dearly. She wants healing for this child, and she reaches out to this man named Jesus. She named Jesus as Son of David, and I think that's very, very important to understand this scripture. She's connecting him with this messianic promise from the Old Testament. You are Son of David. She knew what that meant. This Gentile woman was better able than the scribes and the Pharisees to grasp the truth about Jesus. I think that's the important lesson to learn about this scripture. This outsider woman who shouldn't have been able to understand the deep theological presence of this man, she gets it. She gets it before even his own disciples who have been with him for a long time. She gets it. I think that's very important. Now, this part bothers me, and I'm still coming to grips with this idea. Jesus doesn't immediately help this woman. I think probably he's still trying to test the disciples, and if so, they failed miserably, because what did they tell Jesus? They say, oh, send her on her way. Let's get rid of her. She's just making a lot of noise. Get her out of the way. Instead of seeing her pain and feeling compassion for her, instead they see her only as a nuisance. I pray that we don't have that same attitude today. Those who are making noise, maybe they have reason to make a noise. They're crying out for help, and it's up to us to help them. It's important also to note that she called Jesus Lord. She didn't call him teacher, rabbi. She called him Lord. And then Jesus compares her to a house dog. Again, this part bothers me a little bit. That's not the sweet Jesus we normally think of. He compares her to a house dog. Dogs were considered to be unclean animals, mainly because they ate the food that was unfit for humans. But don't judge Jesus' words just yet. Give it a chance. The Canaanite woman comes back at Jesus with this statement, and I think it's one that should still convict us today. She tells him that even the dogs get the crumbs Jesus had for the chosen people. Israel had been meant to be the first recipient, but she saw a bigger picture, and that there's a broader promise that the Messiah, this Jesus, would bring the whole world under God's reign. Jesus was not to be Lord just to that select group, but to everyone. And he remains that way today. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus comments only 4 other times about someone's faith. I found that interesting. There's an instance of a Gentile, another Gentile. He was a centurion. He was part of the Roman army. He comments on this man's faith. And then there was an instance where 4 friends of a paralyzed man seek out Jesus. He is preaching, he's teaching inside a home. And do you remember the story? They take their friend, this paralyzed man, up on the roof of that building. They manage to put him down through the ceiling so Jesus will see him and heal him. That took a step of faith for those 4 men to do that. There's another unclean woman by those standards in those days who seeks out Jesus. He accepts her. And then there are the 2 blind men who were able to see the Son of David. Don't you find it interesting that in all 4 of these cases, they were improbable individuals for seeking out Jesus? They weren't part of the inner circle. They weren't part of the chosen few. Instead, they were not set apart by their ethnic origin, their amount of education, their occupations. But what is notable about these outcasts, these outsiders, was their faith, which Jesus recognized. It was their faith. Let's be open to others. We might learn an important lesson on faith in the process. I hope to see you soon.